I'm privileged to have in the studio. I call her the Chief Environmentalist of the world, Dr. Vandana Shiva, and she's been at this advocating for the best environmental practices around the world for the last 30 to 40 years. Is that not something? Well, we have her to tell us about her journey and what has brought her to Ghana. What brought you to Ghana, Dr. Shiva?
What's brought me to Ghana is the fact that what Ghana is facing is what India is facing, is what Tanzania is facing, what Zimbabwe is facing, what the US is facing, what Europe is facing. A recolonization and a new resource grab, this time of the living wealth that we have evolved over 10,000 years of farming, our seeds. And these seeds now are claimed to be the intellectual property of 5 companies. I was very privileged to have been at a meeting in '87. I'm old, so I have a long experience at this. '87, the biotechnology industry, as it is called, which is really the genetic engineering industry, which is the chemical industry, which was the war chemical industry, they said, now we've got to control the seed for profits. And the only way to do it is through genetic engineering, taking a patent, and through the patent collecting royalties from poor peasants. I say an easy way to remember what a GMO is at the ethical level, GMO means God move over, Monsanto takes over.
Well, I do understand the point. And when the subject of genetic engineering comes up, it's a very worldwide sensitive issue. How do you think, and particularly in our part of the world, we currently have a bill before Parliament which has generated a lot more controversies called the Plant Breeders Bill, but somehow the ministers, the government officials, and the various regulatory agencies and the quasi-government agencies think that, well, it is not intended to bring into Ghana or introduce GMOs, etc. How do we make sure that the poor peasant farmers who tend to tilt lands in many of the countries we find in the developing world get their money's worth, really will live long enough, generations beyond theirs, to always till their land and get what they are worth?
So an honest plant breeders bill should be a farmers' rights bill, because 99.9% breeding has been done by farmers who have given us the tremendous diversity of crops. The millets, 200 varieties of rice in India, thousands of varieties of corn in Mexico. They are the ones who evolved this working with nature. In '94, the same arguments were made in India that World Trade Organization requires that a plant variety breeders' rights bill be passed. There are 2 ways in which corporations own the seed. The first is through patenting, which means they claim it's an invention, and therefore they get a royalty. And the second is they claim breeders' rights, which the latest version of that international agreement between corporations is called UPOV 91, which, as far as the farmer is concerned, has the same impact. Farmer can't save seed, farmer can't exchange seed, farmer can't evolve seed. Now, '94, they said to our parliament the same thing, that you've got to pass this bill, UPOV 91, which is like the breeders' rights bill of Ghana, because it's a WTO requirement. We showed that the text in WTO, in Article 27.3b, is sui generis. It does not say UPOV. Ghana should make its own law, and it should be a farmers' rights law. I was appointed by our agriculture minister on the expert group to redraft that law. And we've put farmers' rights into our law. It's called the Plant Variety and Farmers' Rights Act. Then they try and bring a seed bill, which is of same quality, compulsory registration. I think it is very, very important for Ghana at this point to recognize 2 things. First, that every Breeders' Rights Act and every Patent Act is a resource grab, a grabbing of the seed and biodiversity, an ownership by 5 companies for which the poor peasant and the country will have to pay royalties, and it will be an economic drain. India is spending $200 million for royalty payment to Monsanto for cotton. Brazilian farmers had to sue Monsanto because Monsanto was collecting $2.2 billion as royalty. We are talking about a new kind of imperialism where the rents are collected from the seed itself. But we know through ecological farming and conservation of varieties and breeding, with participation of public scientists with farming communities, we can double food production. We've done that in India through Navdanya, the movement I've built over the last 30 years. The way to food security is not 4 commodities in the hands of 5 companies with 2 traits of genetic engineering. Food security is in biodiversity, seed in farmers' hands, partnership between public agencies and farmers, and national sovereignty in seed and food.
How do you think that we need to marshal the needed advocacy in many of the developing countries we find in Africa to really tell government in the face that the farmers have rights and the rights also need to be respected?
Well, you're doing that here in the show,
definitely.
But I think across the world, and Africa, why is Africa so important? Africa is important because A, it's the source of humanity, B, it's the source of so many of the food crops. The millets we have, the pigeon pea that I celebrate in India are actually African gifts. African farmers have intelligence. There's an assault today, whether it's from the G8 or the AGRA, the Alliance for the Green Revolution in Africa. The old colonizers are coming full force to say, Africans don't have minds. We are going to tell them what their agriculture should be like. Advocacy today needs to connect the farmers' rights to save and exchange seed as an absolute right, and therefore farmers, the Breeders' Bill is totally legitimate. But a farmer's right is connected to citizens' right to eat healthy food. Yesterday, we were having a discussion, and one of the intellectuals of Ghana said, this is about the colonization of our stomach. We have to realize that the interest of the farmer and the citizen is the same, because healthy food, safe food, low-cost production of food, culturally appropriate food is the right of all citizens.
We do understand the royalties that will be paid on whatever inventions of seeds and whatever is perhaps cooked somewhere in the lab scientifically. But just in plain language, how does farmers, or how do farmers in our part of the world tend to be non-beneficiaries of all these level of movements?
Yes. Well, 3 quick things on this. First, this is not really scientific. All they do is shoot a gene with a gene gun. They shoot a gene with a gene gun into the cells of a plant, and they're not sure if it'll get absorbed, so they add an antibiotic resistance markers which give you antibiotic resistance. They act a viral promoter which can give you viral diseases. That package of blind technology is what is called genetic engineering. Has it produced more yields? No. Yields are actually coming down in India. Has it reduced chemical use? No. Pesticide use has increased 13-fold in the cotton areas of India. What happens to the farmers? Just look at the India story, because they're going to tell you BT cotton in India was a miracle. I have watched this crop being brought illegally. I had to sue the company in the courts, Supreme Court of India. The price of seed jumped 8,000%. Do the Ghanaian peasants want to have seed that's 8,000% more costly? That doesn't work to control pests, 13 times more pesticides. Farmers are getting trapped in debt, and debt-trapped farmers are being pushed to suicides. We've never had suicides among farmers in India on the scale we're having. 284,000 farmers have committed suicide. 95% of the cotton seed sold in the market now belongs to one company, which collects half the price of the seed as royalty. The farmer goes to suicide. Monsanto's wealth increases.
How do you keep drumming home this very idea of a conspiracy theory when all over the world, well, governments are really buying into this whole revolution?
I don't call it a conspiracy. I call it an economic strategy. What could be more brilliant than taking a seed which reproduces itself, which multiplies, which is in the hand of farmers, taking it over through genetic engineering and saying, now it's our invention and you pay us the royalties. Which governments are buying into it? Most governments haven't. When I was invited in 1987 to this meeting, they had said by 2000 all crops will be genetically modified. Only 4 crops are genetically modified in about 7 countries. The international community actually negotiated a biosafety protocol falling out from the Convention on Biological Diversity, that we have to assess the impact of these new technologies and the environmental releases of GM seeds on the environment, there is contamination, there's cross-pollination, there's genetic pollution. On people's health, there is now evidence from many labs of organ failure, of mammalian cancer, and all the companies do is get the scientists destroyed. And the third is on the socio-economic condition, the examples I gave you from India of an 8,000% increase in seed prices, when seed as a sovereign right would mean zero cost, 2 rupees, 5 rupees seed. The resistance around the world, whether it be Europe or most of Africa so far, in India, outside cotton, they've not managed to get anything. They tried the BT eggplant, and it was stopped because of public hearings held across the country. And I hope in Ghana there will be public hearings, both on the right to seed. We shouldn't call it the Plant Breeders Bill, which we call the Seed Bill. And whose?
It all depends on the level of advocacy that the media and the rest of civil society tends to
Absolutely. But I call it a recolonization. It might be in the language of science, but science is just a shroud. The reality is a recolonization. In the first colonization, they took land. Now they're taking land and seed.
Now, in moving forward with this whole revolution of making sure that what is not to be doesn't get to be, how do we need farmers empowered, farmer groups empowered, and even NGOs that relatively work with these farmer groups? And we know in Africa, usually very subsistence farming organizations empowered enough to really face the fires as it will be.
So the way we built the movement in India is both as a conservation movement but also economic movement for farmers' livelihoods. We've trained 750,000 farmers. We've created 120 community seed banks where seed is in farmers' hands. And when there's a drought, they can have drought-proof seeds. If there's a cyclone, they can have salt-tolerant seeds. If there's flooding, they can have flood-tolerant seeds. If they want nutrition, they can take the seeds of millet. But the diversity increases, and as diversity increases, farmers' productivity increases, farmers' resilience increases. Our farmers, using native seeds which they have evolved and can continue to evolve, are earning 10 times more than farmers growing BT cotton, hybrid rice, hybrid corn. But for that, you need the partnership. You need governments to support local markets. You need links between the urban citizens who eat as well as the producer groups. Agroecology, biodiversity, fair trade, those are the 3 pillars of an alternative system which generates more employment, more wealth. And I'm so happy. I got up this morning to read our new Prime Minister's first speech in Parliament, and he has made a commitment to organic. He says organic is the only way a nation can protect its resources, generate livelihoods, end the agrarian crisis that has been created by the Monsantos, and create healthy food for all. This is the trend, not the bribing, lobbying, corruption. That is not democracy. Food democracy is saying 3 simple things. We want sustainably produced food so our planet isn't destroyed. 75% of the planetary destruction is from a corporate-led industrial agriculture. We want healthy food.
And that very level of advocacy and lobbying is also taking place in very, well, now developing countries in Africa. And in Ghana particularly, when we don't have the farmers organizing to very large groups and bodies that could really do the advocacy and champion their rights, how do they start?
Well, the first thing is everyone eats. So eating is...
Well, we all do, but not everybody. Everyone cares about where their food is coming from, apart from perhaps if it's got to do with sanitation and hygiene.
Yeah, but today, everyone should care, because if you are not part of the movement for seed sovereignty and food sovereignty, if you're not part of the movement of solidarity for small farmers, which is the biggest employment and livelihood in our parts of the world as well as globally, farming is the biggest livelihood. Food is the biggest economy. Either that economy will throw profits into the hands of 5 corporations or have resources distributed among society for good health, sustainable livelihoods, and conservation of our soil, our water, our biodiversity. 75% of the bees have been killed by these same technologies, pesticides and pesticide-producing plants. So we need a solidarity, a very strong solidarity. That is what has brought me here to Africa and to Ghana, that at the end of the day, we are all citizens of one planet. And planetary citizenship is our first responsibility. Secondly, farmers have been degraded. Farmers have been made to look like they deserve nothing when they are the centerpiece of any country's economy and any country's freedom. We need to see the food issue as an issue of freedom. If 4 or 5 centuries ago our countries could rise and say we will not be colonized, it is time to rise again and say we will not be colonized through our seed, through our food, through our agriculture, and our institutions need to serve our people.
Over 3-4 decades of introduction or great advocacy around the world by whoever or whichever agency that would want genetic modified food in the homes of people around the world, and still they haven't been able to make the needed impact even in their own developed countries. What would you say is the most attributable reasons why?
I think the most attributable reason is the lies on which the whole edifice is based. That this is the way to feed the world. When the evidence is there, genetic engineering as a technology doesn't increase yields. The yields come from the original plant into which a toxic gene is added through the tools of genetic engineering. The second very, very big reason why these companies are not making a headway is they have to take away the freedom of the farmer to save seed, which is what the Breeders' Rights Bill is. They have to take away the right of the citizen to know what they're eating. In the United States, the heart of democracy, these companies have prevented GM food labeling. In California, in Washington, and now the state of Vermont passed a law, and they are threatening a government, saying, our freedom of speech, the corporation is pretending it's a person and has a freedom of speech, and their freedom of speech is their profits. And Vermont's law of labeling is a threat to their profits. If you think labeling will make you lose profits, then you know that your food is bad for people. If you were so confident that it's good for people, then you should see your labeling as a positive labeling. So they have to take away the freedom of the eater and the freedom of the farmer. And food democracy is the answer to this food dictatorship. People are experiencing it as a food dictatorship.
In Africa, where literacy levels are extremely low, we also have great food insecurity on the continent. How vulnerable are the sectional groups within the demographics of Africa?
I think the most vulnerable groups are women and children. And sadly, farmers who could be the answer to food security, but in a system that is designed to take away profits, wealth, and resources from the hands of the farmers and put them in the hands of these 5 giants. Farmers are not just getting poorer and into debt. Farmers are actually becoming the hungriest of all. Of the 1 billion people hungry in the world, 500 million are farmers who are growing food at high cost, taking debt, and selling what they grow and not eating it. Farmers can be the answer to food security by growing food with their own seeds, growing food through agroecology, and yes, there is illiteracy. But illiteracy does not mean ignorance. I started the ecological movement in my life in 1970s, where illiterate women of the Himalaya came out and said, we're going to hug the trees, we won't let them be cut. They didn't go to school, but they are more than PhDs in ecology. The women of Ghana, the peasants of Ghana, are the real doctorates of breeding. They're the ones to which government should turn to say, teach us, what other crops do we eat? Because the global system trades in 5 commodities. Probably a kitchen garden in Ghana has 200 plants that are eaten. And we need to turn back to our indigenous knowledge, our biodiversity, and realize that we have both the mind and the hands to be able to feed ourselves.
And I was asking this very question based on what the perceived vulnerability of the African farmer is, and especially when, well, we could have some specimens sprouting somewhere in the field, which could be a revolution for that very farmer who also would need increased yield. some of these dotted case studies could be perhaps the lead advocacy for those out there who want GMOs to be a part of our lives?
I think this is already happening. In fact, I'm traveling
well, I know it is
in Africa. I'm traveling in Africa with Milan Bele of the African Food Sovereignty Alliance, and our next halt is in Tanzania, where case studies of agroecological success will be presented. Navdanya in India has shown that we double food production, and instead of measuring the yield of 4 commodities, turning our land into deserts of monocultures, poisoned and toxic and sprayed with Roundup, we can be gardens of fertility, of abundance. We can produce 2 times what the world needs. They keep citing the figure of 9 billion, and that's why you need genetic engineering. Agroecology can feed 14 million without increasing acreages of agriculture. But 2 facts everyone should know in Ghana. The industrial system, which keeps pushing itself, only provides 30% of the food. 70% still comes from small farms. We need to move from 70% to 100%. This is the year of family farming, which celebrates the fact that the backbone of food security is the small farmer. Instead of taking the 30% to 45%, which is already destroying 75% of the planet, and by 45% they'll have made this planet dead. You won't have food on a dead planet.
Indeed, in Ghana, between 75 and 85% of farmers are on subsistence farming activity or level. So now, as you're in Ghana, how do we make sure the various sectional leaders of farmer groups of civil society are reached and adequately? Some of these concerns are also told them. These information are also relayed adequately.
Well, one thing is, I think your parliament should definitely study the report of our parliament on GMOs. It's available on the net. You just have to go GMO Parliamentary Committee of the Indian Parliament. And it has gone down in detail, talked to everyone, including the Monsantos. They should understand the reality. They should also see what's going on in the Indian Supreme Court, where our technical expert committee has said, no GMOs, of which we are a center of diversity. 10 years till we build strong biosafety capacity. And on seed monopolies in every law in India, whether it be the Farmers' Rights Act or Article 3J of our patent law, which says biological processes are not inventions, which is what Monsanto wants. It wants to declare biological processes as their inventions, which is why I say they want to play God. I think the second is we need a lot of exchange. My trip here is one part of that exchange. We would love to receive both scientists and farmers and parliamentarians to India to show them around both the tragedy of farmers' suicides as well as the hope in small farmers' fields through agroecology.
Okay, and so when are you leaving?
I leave this evening.
Okay. I hope you have a good time here.
Thank you. It's a lovely country. It's so abundant. Ghana has no business to have food insecurity. The earth is saying, I'll give you everything. I've had the most delicious papaya, banana, those fruits, preserve them. Because if you eat banana and papaya in America, it tastes like a rock. The breeding done by industry for profits and long-distance transport is not for food. It is breeding rocks to sit on a supermarket shelf. We need delicious food, nourishing food that becomes healthy bodies, our cells and our blood and our freedom.
Oh, how poetic. That's good. From Ghana, where are you going?
Tanzania and then back home.
All right, great advocate. And we've been speaking to Dr. Shiva. Dr. Vandana Shiva is a great environmentalist. She is the Earth's lead environmentalist and advocate for the best foods that could be planted and sprout from our soil. Okay, I wish you well.
Thank you.
And we're taking a break on AM Talk. We'll have a lot more for you on the show. Do stay on.